Hey y'all, I'm here with Marci Marie, who is just an absolute inspiration and a joy to be around, and I wanted to talk to you about your experience in Texas prisons and after and all the stuff that you're doing.
Okay, let's get to it.
Okay, so you went to Texas prison for how long?
I was gone for almost 11 years.
Okay, and on what charge?
Theft over 200,000.
Okay, so you're like a mastermind, you're like an Ocean's 11 type.
Not quite, but right. Yeah, I took a bunch of money that didn't belong to me, and I did it in a shisty, sneaky way. So in that way, yes.
Okay, I mean, but that's ownership of what you did. But at the same time, you did this in a place where there was a good old boy network that was very unhappy that you got the best of them. And is it normal to get 11 years in Texas prison for stealing money?
So Jesse, my sentence was 20 years. I made parole at 10.
Okay.
So, and then I had to do this program, and that's why it was almost 11, right? And so Texas is hard on their money crimes.
Okay.
So that wasn't so unusual, right? 20 years was a little much. They offered me 40.
Oh, wow.
That was my first offer. They wanted me to sign for 40 years.
Oh my God. Well, and because the other thing is, you've taken responsibility for this, which I think is really huge. You don't minimize what you did, because I think a lot of times white collar criminals or people who steal money say, "Oh, it wasn't such a big deal." At the same time, this does seem like there was a really disproportionate response, and you did everything right. Like, you've talked about doing everything right and thinking, "Okay, I'll make parole and be able to go home," and then they turned you down for parole after how many years?
They turned me down the first time I was up for parole at 28 months. They turned me down. A year later, they turned me down. A year after that, they turned me down. A year after that, they turned me down, and then I lost it in there.
I was going to say, when you feel like you're doing everything right and you've really turned your life around and you're focused and you're taking responsibility, at what point does it just end up being too much and you just don't care anymore?
Yeah, and you see that happen a lot, and it definitely eats at your spirit. It gives you no motivation to do what's right. You lose hope. And I know you didn't, I know we're not talking about this, but I want to bring it up. It's something that we're trying to get a bill passed, actually, called the Common Sense Parole Bill, and it's just for that meaning. So the reasons that they were giving me for denying my parole were reasons for, or were my actions from the free world.
Yeah.
I've already been sentenced for those actions. So they were using significant monetary loss and things like that for the reasoning.
Yeah.
Well, I can't change that. Someone being in prison can't change that. So this bill would kind of change things around, and it would give inmates a treatment plan. And if they did that treatment plan, then parole would say, yeah, let's do this.
Okay, well, so Virginia got rid of parole in 1995. But a lot of the guys who were there and were there for years and decades, they were being told the same thing. You're being denied parole because of the serious nature and circumstances of your crime, which is obviously never going to change. So if the point is saying, we've given you a parole date and we're going to examine your conduct at that point, judging them based on their past is not actually considering the terms of parole. So it's the same situation in Virginia.
Absolutely. It's like putting that carrot in front of you and then keep moving it forward and moving it forward and never giving the reward for your behavior. So that does weigh on someone that's incarcerated mentally. And that's when I had my breakdown.
Okay. But you went through your rough patch. You kind of acted up. You showed how tough you were, which I think is, a lot. But then at what point did you finally realize, like, I want to get home. I want to be with my kids. I want to be with my grandkids. This is the life I want to live.
So there was like some rock bottom moments there in prison. And I mean, suicide attempts, time in the state prison, psychiatric hospital, in the roughest conditions that you can imagine. And there was a point where I thought, it was just like a thought, am I either going to rot and die, or am I just going to pull myself out of this? And it just was almost in that instant, I stopped my crap. I stopped making all the horrible decisions I was making in there. And don't get me wrong, the mental problems were still there, but I stopped digging my hole deeper, right?
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think everybody, at least everybody that I've talked to who's locked up long-term, who struggled with addiction or struggled with trauma, reaches a breaking point, reaches like kind of this dark night of the soul moment where they realize, like, I'm going to merge on one side or the other, and I have to choose which side. So it sounds like you did that, and you've come out on the right side of it.
As soon as I stopped getting in trouble, then I think the state realized, okay, well, we've had 8, 9, 10 years out of her, and she hasn't been getting in trouble anymore. And that's when.
Okay. And you've talked about this long period of adjustment getting out. Like, you didn't just hit the street and everything was fine, because you had a lot of trauma from Texas prisons.
I for sure have every PTSD symptom, and I've never been professionally diagnosed, but for sure I display those symptoms. For sure depression, for sure anxiety. And then it wasn't just me that experienced that trauma, it was my family.
Yeah.
You know, our actions have such a huge ripple effect that, I mean, it just goes on, right? My mom was so depressed that she lost her job and didn't work for years, which then financially put that burden on my dad, who then got stressed and anxiety, which led to further heart problems. You can imagine, Jesse, I left my kids. I left 2 in diapers and 3 in middle school, and they suffered. So it wasn't just when someone comes home, it doesn't just fix all that right away. So I'm not trying to cry, and I've talked about this before, but it hurts. You know, I hurt them very much so, and we all had to heal from that. So, yeah.
So you spent about a year of really kind of like trying to reconcile, trying to focus on your family, trying to focus on yourself, and then some things have happened since then. So can you tell me about that?
A few things have happened. So I started sharing my story on social media, which has been hugely therapeutic for me. I have met so many awesome people through social media and my community, that I just feel very blessed to be a part of that. And then so one day I'm sitting in the bathroom and I was kind of scrolling, and I had a message from Rosie O'Donnell. And I was like, probably this is fake. And then I'm looking at her account and it's verified, and I'm like, wait a minute. And that's what it was. She contacted me and we started communicating, and she decided she wanted to produce a television show basically about my life outside of prison. The great part about the show, though, is it's going to flash back into prison scenes.
Sure.
And it's going to show the raw images of what life is like inside of a Texas prison. So it's Rosie O'Donnell, right? So it's definitely going to be comedic. It's definitely going to be some lighthearted. But our goals for the show is that it also would open eyes, and bring awareness, and also show that not everyone fits the stigma or the social image that people have in their mind when they think of someone that went to prison.
Well, and I think that's the thing that I notice about you the most. One is your positivity. The second thing is that your history isn't the history of drug use. It isn't the history of criminality. You just ended up in a position where you made some really bad decisions, but that wasn't what defined you. Like, that wasn't your life. That was a singular event, and yet you were judged for that, and you continue to be judged for that. I mean, you're still on parole, or you're still dealing with these consequences and these repercussions on a daily basis. And it's interesting to see whether that has continued to kind of keep you in line, or whether that's made things harder, because your partner also came out of prison, right?
She did. We actually met in prison, which that's pretty unusual, I think, for a relationship to go from prison to the free world and stay intact, right? And so we've been out almost 2 years now, and her history is definitely different. It's definitely more of the stereotypical inmate vibe or look that society sees. And also what that did for me, not just knowing her and meeting her, but going to prison, and you might have experienced this as well, but going to prison and being around such diversity, but realizing that it's not just, you know, I went to prison because I was 29 years old and started doing something really stupid, not because I grew up in a neighborhood where drugs were readily available and my dad was cooking them in the kitchen, and I wasn't sold to my uncle for, you know, I mean, and this is the kind of people that are in prison. They are broken before they get to prison. You know, we have to do something as a community to change that. We got to start way before the sentencing date.
I agree. And you're doing a lot of advocacy now. You're working with your local area and the Texas legislature. Do you want to highlight some of that?
I am. I definitely want to highlight Linus. And Linus is my favorite. I'm a part of 3 organizations. My heart is with Linus because it is a advocacy group that is, all of our members are justice impacted women. We've all been there.
It's huge.
And we are working to communicate people and ladies that are in prison. So it's mainly women.
Okay.
Now I care about the guys too, so I'm also working with the Texas Prison Community Advocates, and we're working to get Texas air conditioning in prisons.
Okay.
And then I'm working with Texas Statewide Leadership Council, and they're the ones that are kind of teaching us how to testify at legislation, how to rally around a bill and promote that and get some things changed.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for doing what you do on a daily basis. And it's always really nice to hear about the stories with your grandkids too. So we'll get to that another time, but thank you, Marci.
Thanks for having me.